But what I want to talk to you today about, and talk with you today about, is Florida and the offshore reef systems that we have in Florida. Florida is the only state in the continental United States that has offshore reef systems and offshore reef resources in their nearshore waters. Continental United States, okay? Puerto Rico is and territories in the Pacific and Hawaii, they all have reefs, but they're not part of the continent. And some of the reefs up in Daytona, ivory tree coral, the western Florida shelf ledges, Florida reef tract, and this entire reef tract is the National Marine Sanctuary now. And then today I'm going to talk to you about the development and the biology of this area offshore of southeastern Florida, where we have legitimate coral reef communities and hard bottom communities. And this is the little creature that we're going to be talking about today, mostly. It's a coral polyp. Okay, coral polyps have tentacles, they have a mouth cavity, a stomach cavity, and an outer base. And this outer base, during their process, this outer base secretes calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is the limestone. All the reef that you see out here is built upon layers and layers and layers and ages of secretion of calcium carbonate by coral polyps. Well, again, if you have questions about anything that I say, just hands up or just blurt it out, and we want to have a conversation, talk about it. And the picture on the left is a close-up of a coral polyp. And what's important about that particular picture, you see the tentacles, and the tentacles have stinging cells in them that are called nematocysts. But the really important part about that picture is what you see inside their tissues. This green color, and the color that comes from corals, the corals get their color from, is a symbiont, a symbiotic algae that lives inside their tissues. And that symbiotic algae is called zooxanthellae. The zooxanthellae provide somewhere around 80 to 90% of the nutrition that the coral polyp needs to live and survive and thrive. And we'll talk in detail about what can happen when coral polyps are under stress. Now, reefs and hard bottom communities, there's a slight difference between the two. Reef is something that's constructed by a biological process. So in other words, coral polyp secretes calcium carbonate, starts to build up the reef that way. That's a biological process. A hard bottom, on the other hand, is a rock substrate. Substrate is the bottom of the ocean where things attach to it. And the hard bottom community is colonized by benthic organisms. Benthic is an animal that lives on the bottom.
What's substrate?
Substrate is the surface, rock surface, or sand surface, or generally consolidated or unconsolidated. Like sand is unconsolidated. Rock surface is hard rock surface. And animals, or benthic animals, colonize that. Now, you and I need clean air, we need good food, we need healthy living conditions in order to have a healthy existence. Well, coral reefs and coral polyps need the same types of things. They need the proper amount of light, they need the proper amount of oxygen at a high level for them. They need low turbidity. How many people know what turbidity is? Yeah? Huh?
Moving around?
Moving around?
Turbidity?
No.
I'm guessing.
That's good though. Anybody?
Waves crashing.
Not quite. No. Yep.
How clear the water is.
Very good.
Sediments are in
How
the
much sediment is suspended in the water?
Light penetration.
Light penetration is the result. It's either reduced or with more turbidity you have less light reduction. Algae does what?
Reduces it.
Algae produces their their byproducts through photosynthesis.
So that reduces the light penetration.
Right. So
The
algae can't,
turbidity is not just water moving around, it's water moving the mud particles around. and stuff,
water moving
whatever.
mud particles, clay particles, sand particles, very good.
Visibility as a diver, we would call it.
Yep, there you go. If you have low visibility, you have high turbidity. If you have low turbidity, you have great visibility as a diver. Low nutrients. If you have excess phosphorus or nitrogen that winds up in the ocean, and later on, Lindsay's going to start talking about how that happens and the relationship between what's on land and what's out in the ocean. Low nutrient levels, stable temperature. What happens if your temperature goes above 98.6? You get sick. If it goes below 98.6, you're sick. Okay? If the temperature goes beyond the range, 23 to 30 degrees centigrade, corals become stressed. And when they're stressed, they'll expel their algae. Yeah, and you'll see that in a later slide. When they expel their algae, they become bleached. And how many scuba divers in here? Just one? No, a couple. Okay. Have you ever seen a bleached coral? They may be alive. The polyp there may still be alive. If conditions become optimal again, they can re-recruit their algae.
And why does the algae leave?
Because of stress,
or the temperature?
excess temperature, excess salinity, and also the salinity has a range that is optimal for corals as well. Somewhere between 33 and 36 parts per thousand sodium chloride. Types of reefs, types of coral reefs. There's several different types. One's an atoll, and we don't have atolls here on the Broward County coast or in Florida. An atoll is formed when you have a volcano and the coral starts to build around the edges of the volcano, and eventually the volcano, the caldera itself, collapses, and then all you have left is a ring of coral and coral islands and a lagoon in the middle. That's an atoll. And the other types of reefs are continental reefs and fringing reefs. Okay? What we have here in Broward County are generally considered continental fringing reefs. What types of organisms are on the reef? The most common one that we have out here is marine algae or macroalgae. That's a plant. It photosynthesizes. If it has the right conditions, it stays healthy that way. And that's the dominant type of organism that's on our reefs out here is algae. And second is sponges. The big barrel sponge that you see there is a filter type animal. It filters water in through its sponge and then expels the water, and sometimes it reproduces that way. This particular sponge is reproducing in this picture. And cnidarians. It's a very new word. I know it's not an elementary school word. You could use it. You can explain to them what it is. Anemones, soft corals, octocoralia, soft corals that are octocorals. Anybody want to take a venture a guess as to why we call them octocorals? 8 tentacles. All of them have 8 tentacles. The regular coral polyps only have many more tentacles than 8. But octocorals are only 8. Fire coral and stony corals, which is what we're going to talk about for the remainder of this. And ascidians, tunicates. How many of you have been on the beach and you pick something up, looks like a jelly, but it's harder than a jellyfish or jelly, and you squeeze it and it squirts water out? That's a tunicate. Okay. And there are many different shapes and sizes, and that's what you see in this part of the picture right here. Now, This is a map of the offshore reefs here in Broward County. To give you an idea where we are, this is Galt Mile. We're just right over here. And this is the Galt Mile, and this is Fort Lauderdale Beach. And these are three-dimensional maps of the reef. I'm not going to go into how those maps are created, but they're created using a remote sensing device. Now, the reef, outer reef offshore, the furthest offshore, is about 45 to 70 feet depth, and it's known as the third reef terrace. The second one is the middle terrace, the middle reef, 40 to 60 feet depth. The area between the two reefs is a sand deposit. And also there are breaks in the reef, and this one right here is probably at some point in time was a river inlet at one point in time. And we're going to talk about that time scale in just a little bit. And then the inner reef in 15 to 30 feet of water, the first reef terrace, is right along this edge right here. And then further in, you have what we call the ridge complex. And this is mostly hard bottom. Remember what I said about hard bottom? It's exposed substrate, hard substrate, that is colonized by organisms. The organisms come in and live there. They didn't produce it. Other processes produced that rock. And I'm going to talk to you about those processes. And take a look at this blue line. You're going to see the next slide is going to be a cross-section right through that blue line. The outer reef, sand pockets. The middle reef, more sand pockets. The inner reef here, and then the ridges. The ridge complex. We also call, some scientists call that colonized pavement, because that's what it's like. It's a formation, and you're going to learn this in just a couple slides. The Anastasia Formation. Remember that name, because it's also similar to the Miami. It's the Miami Anastasia Formation. Now, we're going to talk about a little bit about the geology of these reefs. Now, the dotted red line you see there is present-day sea level. All right? 120,000 years ago, sea level was about 10 to 15 feet above what it is now. Which means what? Most of this peninsula, Florida, was underwater at that time. So about 120,000 years ago. It's not important that it's the Sangamon interglacial period, but that's... Now, again, 120,000 years ago, corals started growing in an area of the water level where it was optimal conditions for them. They started growing. And in the back of that, you'll see sand. Where does the sand come from?
Fish food.
Very good. Awesome. Yeah, there are islands in the Indo-Pacific that are, there's one that's called Parrotfish Island, because the entire island was built from parrotfish poop. Yeah, so they eat coral, they eat the rock, they digest the polyps, and then they poop out sand. And that's how they build up. In some cases, that's how this sand deposit gets built up. And we're talking 120,000 years ago, too. Corals continue to grow, keeps going on. A lot of sand, a lot of corals. Look at the sea level. You get the buildup of shell material in the back here, the back reef. The back reef is the reef that's east or west of the active building reef. And during that time, the low energy back reef environment resulted in the formation of carbonate ooids. How many have ever heard that?